These days, $20 for a movie ticket doesn't exactly guarantee you a good movie. Availability can always change, of course, but at the time of recording, every film on this list is available there in full. And if I missed any good ones, definitely add them in the comments. For now, here are some classic 1950s sci-fi movies you can actually watch tonight. Destination Moon was released in 1950, and unlike much of the sci-fi that followed in the 1950s, it tries to treat a trip to the moon as seriously as possible. Industrialist Jim Barnes brings together other businessmen to finance a private lunar mission, while General Thayer argues that the first country to reach the moon could gain a major strategic advantage. When concerns about radioactive fallout threaten the project, Barnes decides to launch without waiting for permission. They make it to the moon, only to discover that getting home may be much harder than getting there. Robert A. Heinlein co-wrote the screenplay and served as a technical advisor, which helps explain why the film spends so much time showing how everything would actually work. The early exposition can feel a little dry, but once the rocket leaves Earth, the film becomes much more involving. And compared with so much 1950s sci-fi built around atomic fear and paranoia, Destination Moon feels unusually optimistic about where science might take us. The Day the Earth Stood Still opens with a flying saucer circling the globe before landing in Washington, D.C. Klaatu steps out with a gift for the president, but a nervous soldier mistakes the device for a threat and shoots him. His enormous robot Gort immediately responds by melting the soldier's guns. After being taken to a hospital to recover from the gunshot, Klaatu explains that he has come to deliver an important message to all of humanity. But the world's leaders are too divided to meet together, so he eventually escapes, takes the name Mr. Carpenter, and moves into a boarding house. There he meets Helen Benson and her young son Bobby, and through them gets a closer look at ordinary life on Earth while searching for another way to make his message heard. The film came only 6 years after Hiroshima, while the hydrogen bomb was already under development, so nuclear anxiety was very much part of the world it was made in. His warning, though, is broader. Humanity is becoming dangerous enough to threaten more than just itself. Robert Wise keeps the film restrained, while Bernard Herrmann's score gives the visitor, Gort, and the saucer a genuinely strange presence. More than 70 years later, the basic warning behind the film still works surprisingly well. There have been a lot of versions of The War of the Worlds, and apparently they're still making them. I even watched the 2025 version, which was entirely my own fault. As for the serious contenders, nobody, not even Spielberg, who had far more advanced technology to work with, has. There was a time when Disney actually made movies instead of remaking them, and 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea is a pretty good reminder of that. This live-action adaptation of Jules Verne's novel follows Professor Aronnax, his assistant Conseil, and harpooner Ned Land after they encounter the mysterious submarine Nautilus and its captain Nemo. From there, the film takes them through a series of dangers and discoveries beneath the ocean. Kirk Douglas plays Ned Land with a lot of humor and energy, while James Mason's Captain Nemo is much darker and more complicated. The contrast between them works surprisingly well, especially since the movie is more interested in adventure than long conversations. And visually, it still has a lot going for it. The Nautilus interiors, costumes, underwater photography, and large-scale set pieces give the film a real sense of spectacle. The episodic structure can make it feel a little uneven at times, but as an old-fashioned adventure movie, it still holds up remarkably well. It Came from Beneath the Sea begins when an atomic submarine encounters something enormous underwater. After barely escaping, the crew discovers strange organic material caught on the vessel, and marine biologists eventually identify it as coming from a giant octopus. Atomic testing has made the creature radioactive, driving away its normal prey and forcing it out of the deep ocean in search of food. This is one of Ray Harryhausen's classic monster movies, and it was also his first collaboration with producer Charles H. Schneer, who would go on to work with him many more times. And here's a fun budget-saving trick. The octopus actually has only 6 tentacles. Animating all 8 would have cost too much, so Harryhausen staged the shots in a way that made the missing 2 surprisingly hard to notice. The plot is simple, and the budget definitely shows, but the effects are still the reason to watch it, especially once the creature reaches the Golden Gate Bridge in San Francisco. Since we're in the 1950s, there was no way we were getting away with just one Ray Harryhausen movie. So next up is Earth versus the Flying Saucers. The film clearly followed in the wake of the War of the Worlds, but it also drew directly from Donald Kehoe's 1953 nonfiction book, Flying Saucers from Outer Space, written at the height of the UFO obsession of the time. Scientist Russell Marvin and his wife Carol first encounter a flying saucer while driving through the desert. Soon after, another saucer appears at the rocket facility where Russell works, and an attempted contact turns violent. He later manages to communicate with the visitors and learns that they have plans for Earth that are anything but friendly. Harryhausen gave the saucers their distinctive rotating design, and they remain the real stars of the film. There's also a particularly memorable sequence aboard one of the ships involving a device that can extract information directly from the human mind. Invasion of the Body Snatchers from 1956 was the first screen adaptation of Jack Finney's novel, The Body Snatchers, published just a year earlier. It follows Dr. Miles Bennell, who returns to a small California town and starts hearing the same strange complaint from different patients. People they know look exactly the same, but somehow no longer seem like themselves. Before long, he discovers that human beings are being replaced by emotionless duplicates created by strange pods. It's hard not to connect the film with the political fears of the 1950s. The idea of familiar people suddenly becoming cold, conformist copies fits very easily with the paranoia surrounding communism and McCarthyism, even though Finney himself denied that this was his intention. Don Siegel had already made several film noirs, and that influence is easy to see in the way the movie uses darkness and shadows. Kevin McCarthy is also very good as Bennell, especially as his fear and desperation grow. And one last detail I love: the duplicates were made using full-body casts of the actors. It was a relatively cheap effect, but it works really well. The late 1950s were pretty much the perfect time for space movies, and It, the Terror from Beyond Space, arrived right in the middle of it. The story begins with a rescue mission to Mars. Colonel Edward Carruthers is the only survivor of an earlier expedition, and most of the rescue crew don't believe his claim that some unknown creature killed the rest of his crew. But on the way back to Earth, they discover that something has made it onto the ship with them. And yes, this probably sounds familiar. 20 years later, Alien would take a very similar basic setup, push it much further, and do it with a much bigger budget. The script was written by Jerome Bixby, whose story, It's a Good Life, was later adapted for The Twilight Zone, and who also wrote several episodes of Star Trek. It keeps things simple, with very few locations, and one problem after another as the crew tries to stop the creature. Director Edward Kahn helps the tension by keeping the monster in the shadows for much of the film. If you're in the mood for some light horror in space, this oldie is still a lot of fun. The Trollenberg Terror, also known in the US as the Crawling Eye, takes us to the Swiss Alps, where climbers begin disappearing or turning up dead around the Trollenberg mountain. At the same time, a strange radioactive cloud hangs motionless on the mountain, and a young psychic named Anne seems strangely connected to whatever is happening there. Things get much stranger from there. The creatures can even control their dead victims, sending them back as killers, while the aliens themselves eventually turn out to be enormous, brain-like organisms with tentacles and a single, huge eye. The effects are obviously working with a limited budget, but the creature design is so bizarre that it hardly matters. There's something wonderfully unpleasant about these huge, crawling eyes coming out of the fog. Alien invasion, psychic powers, zombies, and mountain horror all in one movie. I'm not sure what else I can say to convince you.